I might ask an agent to build a stock portfolio for me, but I'm not going to just have it go implement it and risk my money at the hands of an AI agent, let alone giving it access to all my bank accounts. I hesitate having the agentic piece go there.
On today's episode, I'm interviewing Zach Chahalis. He's currently the Senior Director of SEO and Data Analytics at iPullRank. He previously held the role as Vice President of SEO for Apartments.com. Enjoy. Thanks, Zach, for joining me. You have led SEO in-house in a massive marketplace, Apartments.com, previously known as CoStar, or if that...
So Apartments.com is owned by the CoStar Group. So CoStar Group is kind of one of those conglomerate type of companies. We also own Homes.com, Lands.com, and a lot of other like major marketplaces, LoopNet from the commercial real estate side. So it's just the parent company.
And you spent some time there in between your time in iPullRank, because you had quite a long tenure at iPullRank, left to work on Apartments.co under CoStar, and then you went back to iPullRank. I want to know what made you choose this career path, what made these decisions, like were you looking for a new challenge to put things into effect in-house? And what are some of the learnings in your journey in the last 3 years during these changes?
Yeah, I'll say like the vast majority of my career, and I've been an SEO now for over 15 years, the majority of it has been agency side. I did have a stint in-house with a company called Global Payments around 2020 to 2022, but then I went back agency side, and that was when I was with iPullRank for about 2 years at that point. Honestly, the opportunity with Apartments kind of came out of an element of networking and just, a good opportunity that came along. The person that I ended up working for there was actually a past client of mine about 10 years ago, and he and I had a great time working with each other. And they were looking for someone to come in and help guide and revitalize the SEO program a bit for the SEO aspects of Apartments.com. And yeah, it was too good of an opportunity to pass up. Went in there for a little over a year and a half. Really enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed a lot of aspects of it, but I missed some aspects of kind of being on the bleeding edge of SEO from the stuff that iPullRank was doing perspective. But also, I think I've worked very well in a lot of in-house environments. I can certainly, work very well from like that kind of a little bit more of a corporate, a little bit more structured aspect. But I think there's elements of being in an agency that I just prefer for right now during where my career is.
Is it an exciting time to be in an agency because you get to experiment with a wide range of clients, especially with all of the changes that are going on in the space of AI and SEO?
I think it is. I've had this conversation with a couple people. So like in-house is maybe a weird spot right now, right? Because there's a lot of conversation happening about AI search, but folks don't necessarily know the answers right now. It still kind of is operating in a black box type of model. And I think a lot of folks are kind of struggling to explain or have those conversations with leadership on what they need to be looking at or how things are evolving and changing. I mean, I think a thing that a lot of in-house leadership is still missing is, hey, yeah, we don't want to forget about AI search because there is still a lot going on there. It is exponentially growing, but it's still very small. But we also can't forget about the classic search component too. So that's kind of where I love how iPullRank thinks about the relevance engineering aspect, because it's the kind of the art and science of improving the visibility for search surface, which includes every aspect of it. But that's, I think, the challenge right now is a lot of in-house folks are going to deal with a lot of those tougher conversations. And then the economy's in a weird spot too, where, and we've seen it unfortunately over the last year or so, marketing and SEO budgets are one of the things that get cut first. And especially when folks are thinking about staffing reductions, unfortunately, that seems to be a big impact right now. For me, I think the agency side is a little bit more interesting right now because of the wide breadth of clients that I get to work with, because I have clients in a wide different array of verticals ranging anywhere from e-com to lead generation, B2B to B2C, different types of industries. So I'm able to see how AI search is impacting and affecting different organizations, like a publisher, for example, being dramatically more impacted by AI search and things that can be taken into an AIO compared with like an e-com for now, where there's some aspects of how you could do e-com in ChatGPT, AI mode, etc. But a lot of folks are still operating in traditional search models for e-com.
So you're just testing out everything at this point.
Yes.
It is a trying time for people in SEO that are doing in-house SEO, right?
Yep.
Especially with how there's a wider issue in the space where everyone is sort of losing their job or at risk of losing their job. But in the past couple of months, there have been job vacancies by these big LLM providers
Yep.
looking for SEO expertise. So there might be a renewed
That,
importance. How do you make sense of that with
yeah.
what's actually going on in the market? Do you have some intel because you're working with a wide range of clients, so you're working with a lot of in-house teams. So maybe you have some insight on what's actually going on.
Yeah, a lot of the clients I'm working with are actually growing more. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've seen a little bit of impact of like some team adjustments and shuffling and things like that, but many of them are growing. And yeah, I mean, we see a lot of these postings coming out from OpenAI, Anthropic, all these places that are looking more about like, hey, we need an AI search product manager. I think even Microsoft had one up recently too. So I think there's maybe a weird ending from leadership that exists beyond where SEO lives in an organization today, that they think SEO is becoming deprecated, and SEO to a point is a little bit deprecated. That's kind of why we lean on the relevance engineering piece, and it goes beyond just SEO. But I don't
For
think
everyone listening, we'll get into relevance engineering in a bit and we'll define it. But yes, sorry, Zach, you were saying?
yeah. So I think folks are maybe kind of looking at it going like, oh, well, this AI search thing is coming, or oh, we could use AI to replace some of these roles. And honestly, it's not working out for a lot of companies. I mean, don't get me wrong, if you're talking about like a gigantic org that's investing heavily in AI, yeah, maybe that's working a little bit differently. But in terms of AI replacing a lot of roles, I mean, some of the code it's putting out is good. The way that it's approaching optimizing classic SEO, it's pedestrian. Like being replaced by those isn't really working out. But I think a lot of those leaders haven't caught on to, if these big companies, the ones that are putting out these AI models and AI platforms, are hiring for SEOs, then we shouldn't be getting rid of our SEOs. Because if anything, when they come back and they want to hire them again, they're going to be more valuable and more expensive.
So short term, they're not thinking long term. They're just making short term decisions.
Which is, I mean, unfortunately, having done the B school, business school route, and again, getting my MBA now, like, I mean, that's unfortunate how a lot of companies think and operate is they do think very short term, when in some cases they should be thinking long term. Now, you've got to satisfy stockholder needs and, the ability to hit what you have for bottom line targets and things like that. Get it. But I think they're looking in the wrong area for how they're trying to get there.
You mentioned how SEO or parts of SEO is being deprecated. I want to know, what is your belief about SEO that you maybe held 5 years ago that you're now confident was wrong or is not relevant?
Ooh. All right. I'm going to lean into site speed here. Now, I think a lot of people made a big stink about site speed a couple of years ago, and a lot of people thought it was one of the biggest things that you could do from a ranking factor standpoint. And I guess my hot take here is it's not really a ranking factor direct implication anymore. Anything that's been gleaned out of what you can do from a site speed perspective to impact your rankings has kind of been milked dry years ago. But with that said, I think there's some different aspects of how we need to look at site speed, because it is still relevant and important. I'm not saying that site speed is not important, but it's the why I think a lot of folks are not following. So the US monopoly case over the last year did reveal, hey, Google is taking Chrome user experience crux signals and factoring into a ranking system called NavBoost, or they were calling it Glue internally. And that is a 13-month rolling average of engagement metrics on a site. How much do folks enjoy engaging with your website? So site speed matters in that sense, kind of indirectly. If your site speed is slow and it takes so long for users to load your site that you're providing a poor user experience, then naturally you're transitioning into a place of having a lower nav boost score, which then can weigh you down in the rankings if you're being compared to somebody else. But then site speed is also important from the AI search perspective too, where if you're not rendering your content quick enough, about 2 seconds, then the AI learning models are giving up, and you're entirely reliant on the RAG model in order for your content to appear in AI search. So there's kind of different nuances to why site speed matters, but it's not like this gigantic ranking signal that I've seen people talk about and kind of what, folks tried to imply to me about 5 years ago.
And what other technical SEO factors that no longer hold their weight or maybe are not as important as they once were that you'd like to share? Any controversial takes you have on technical SEO factors and what people should focus on and what they shouldn't, or what's being given too much airtime?
Yeah. From a controversial perspective, I'm going to include Schema in the technical SEO perspective. I know a lot of people could argue it's on-site to a point. Schema is an interesting area, something that I've always been passionate in, but there was a good disagreement going on in the SEO space a couple of months ago now, where a lot of folks were saying, hey, this has no impact on AI crawlers, AI search, how the AI models are parsing and understanding your content and what you're putting out there. That's kind of been a little bit of an about face in that area as more data has come out, and does show that, hey, structured data is heavily leveraged and heavily looked at when it comes to looking at your content in terms of what's going to be shown and selected for AI search models. So I think there is a big piece there, but I am a big believer in structured data, and I think a lot of folks are missing the mark and the opportunity with Schema because they're only doing the things that generate rich results. So they're only looking at what works in Google's rich results testing tool, for example. Very rarely do I see folks that are taking the full breadth of vocabulary that's available to them on the schema.org library of vocabulary and using that. What I like to look at it as structured data, and I like to use the analogy. Structured data is like taking a Shakespearean novel and distilling it to a kindergarten reading level for the crawler that you're giving it to. You're making it easier to understand you, your business, your authors, your product offering, your locations, what have you. So I think folks need to be looking beyond just what goes into the rich results piece and leveraging the entire schema.org vocabulary in order to mark up what their company does, what their entities are. And this has been tested and proven by multiple different people. I think there's also an area of looking at JavaScript SEO. So JavaScript SEO is, I'm going to say, it should be looked at differently than how it has been looked at. Like, Mike King at IPR has been one of the pioneers in terms of how to look at JavaScript SEO for a long time. And I think the thing to note here is the classic crawlers have gotten a lot better at parsing and understanding JavaScript. And we can see it. Run an inspect URL in Google Search Console, and you can see the JavaScript being run and rendered to a point. Some of the other classic search engines do struggle a little bit with JavaScript SEO, so there's still benefit and value in doing it. But as the AI search age has evolved, this is something where JavaScript SEO has formed a new life because, yes, the classic crawlers have gotten better at parsing and understanding it, but if you want to be appearing in the learning models and you want to make sure that the learning models can crawl and effectively understand your site, any content that you're rendering through JavaScript is either invisible or only partially visible to the crawler, depending on how you've implemented it. So if you're not doing something like server-side rendering your content or limiting the content that's coming in via JavaScript on your site, there's a good chance you're hurting your ability to have that performance and visibility on the AI side of things.
Sort of like, it's no a must-have that it will determine the entirety of your SEO success, but it's good to look into your SEO that's working, make sure your site speed's okay. It's so nuanced, right? Based on any company that you speak to, any team that you work with. I was actually trying to see a post from Mark Williams Cook, if I'm not mistaken, on how like a schema is very important because, certain information is actually being taken from the LLMs that are not necessarily on your web page. So you can have addresses there that's really important for local SEO, etc. Right. So I think these are all very important information that needs to be presented. So yes, make use of the entire schema.org. Is that what you tell all your clients?
Yeah. It's one of those things where I have a lot of conversations with both my clients, but also I do some of the sales conversations that we have here at iPullRank. So when I'm talking to folks, I'm always trying to explain to them like, hey, this is a missed opportunity. That structured data is something that we can help you with and help you build. I think a lot of folks are not building that full knowledge graph around their entities on their website effectively. The other piece I forgot to mention before too, and just call out like, yeah, you were talking about what Mark put out there. Both Google and Bing have come out and said, hey, we value structured data. We still value structured data, especially for our AI-based models. It has been said by Google and it has been said by Bing. So yes, I know take sometimes what the search engines say at face value, but I think we've seen proof in the data, proof in the rich results that this is respected and followed. So yeah, I mean, the main thing right now is building out that knowledge graph. So that way search engines, AI crawlers, AI engines, pick your alphabet soup of GEO, AEO, etc., making sure that everyone can understand the entities of your site and what you do via your knowledge graph.
I want to talk a bit about entity mapping because what does that actually look like operationally? You mentioned knowledge graphs. There's also content models, internal linking models, all of the above. Like how do you sort of put that in practice? Maybe you can talk me through your entity mapping for a client of yours, a recent client of yours.
Yeah.
You can always drop a name.
I'll think about it from like the real estate perspective. If you were to really kind of think about where to start with your knowledge graph, start at the homepage and work your way down, because the homepage is where you're meant to define your organization, who you are, what you do, who works there, what your social profiles are, what your logo image is, all the stuff that goes into an organization structure data markup. You can also clarify there if you're owned by a parent company or organization. But as you work your way down the site, then you almost need to kind of tree branch your knowledge graph to support that. So if I am supporting geographies, for example, and I'm a location-based service, so I've gone from my homepage into, at least here in the United States, from a state-based perspective, then now I'm defining the entity of I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, so I'm servicing the state of Georgia. Then I'm servicing the city of Atlanta. Then I'm servicing the neighborhood of Buckhead, for example. So you're defining these entities in a way that aligns with what your product offering is. If it's e-commerce, for example, then you're maybe defining the different product lines that you offer and down to the product level, and you're kind of tying these things back, and you're clarifying all the data about it as it goes along the way. So you have these tree branches that are kind of going along, but then there's these kind of little offshoots of every little node that basically provides more detail and information about that node itself. If I'm on a product, for example, that's your pricing, your availability, your product image, your descriptions, all the information about reviews and the stuff that goes into essentially explaining what your product offering is. But all these things continue down. But then to me, there's also offshoot branches that tie into it. And this is where maybe internal linking ties into it too, is let's say I'm talking about a product offering and I've gotten my tree down to that level. Historically, a lot of brands should be looking at and have been looking at content on a blog or supporting content that ties back into their product or service line offerings. I'm a big believer in like, hey, if we launch a new product feature, we should have a blog post that talks about that. It should tie back to the product. It should link effectively. But we should be talking about that and communicating that. But then there's a good way of tying back linking in both directions from the product to, hey, learn more about this, or the learning article, hell, well, now that you learned about it, come back and take a look at the product type of thing. So you can create these internal linking relationships, but it's also another way of tying the entities from a knowledge graph standpoint to effectively work with each other. Because if you're doing those write-ups, for example, you should follow EAT best practices in the sense of having authorship, an author bio, preferably an author page, and those things factor in too. So now you're looking at the write-up and you tie back to some of these initial knowledge graph things that you've defined. Your article markup should include your publisher information, which goes back to your organization markup that we define in the verse spot. It should talk about your author markups and explain why these people should be trusted as experts, as people that have experience, that people that have authority and trustworthiness on the topic set. And then it's marking up the article content itself. So that way, any crawler that's coming in and looking at your knowledge graph can kind of say, okay, cool. These people are talking about this topic and they should be trustworthy or knowledgeable on this topic because they have experience talking about it as a brand over here, and the authors have experience over here, and we've defined why they should be listened to. So a lot of it comes down to what you're doing with your website, what you're selling, what you're trying to organize your site as, and then building your knowledge graph around that product offering. But starting essentially from your homepage, really kind of take a step back and go, what do we do? What is it that we do? And then use that to craft, okay, we do a service line offering. Okay, let's go create the service line structure data markup that supports this. And maybe it's service lines by geo. Okay, cool. Well, let's make sure we're factoring in the geography component of it. You can mark up areas served. You can mark up information and content about how something ties to another aspect of your site. So you can do like an is related to field. So there's a whole bunch of different ways of just kind of building out this tree depending on who you are and what you do.
Yeah. When you mentioned the internal linking gaps, do you actually build out any of your workflows using LLMs? Have you vibe coded anything to find? Because you enjoy, like you said, you do for every product launch, you feel like there should be a relevant blog post so that increases the amount of the amount of information you have for your site, for your clients, etc.
Yep.
So have you built anything to make your life easier
Yeah.
for finding internal linking gaps?
And share, but I can share a couple of aspects of how we leverage this. And definitely these are not new conversations, so I'm sure folks can think about how to build their own. So one, we're big believers in vectorizing content and trying to essentially get back to the scientific approach of how do we optimize the content? How do we edit it? How do we make it more chunkable or more digestible, both for users and for search engines? If we need to look at that, for example, we've created scripts and products that can go back and take a look at, all right, how do we chunk this out. And this is actually a tool that's available on the iPullRank website called Relevance Doctor. This will help you identify how you chunk out the content more effectively and can kind of help you identify your similarity scoring to the focal keyword that you're going after. So we can, in theory, look at that at scale and then say, okay, now that we understand how this piece of content fits into the site, we vectorized it. We could look at something like, how does this compare to the content holistically for the entire site? Is it relevant? Is it not? But we can also use that to vectorize, okay, these pieces are related to one another. They talk about similar topics. They talk about similar focal keywords in some way. And you could use a similar modeling or some code. Like we've built a couple scripts that can do this, but essentially kind of say, hey, we see a relationship between these two pages. There should be an internal link that ties in here effectively. So we tried to use LLMs as a way to improve efficiency, not to take away like the strategy piece. If anything, it allows us to double down more on the strategy and think about how we want to build and map some of these things. But in terms of sitting there and going, okay, let's say the classic way of looking for an internal linking opportunity would have been do a site colon search around the keyword to see what pages show up and then maybe back into your internal linking from there. Now you can do that via a simple Python script. You could do that via a tie-in to Screaming Frog and running a crawl against an AI model like having Olama tied into your Screaming Frog crawl and then putting in some of the different scripts that tie back into embeddings, that tie back into how you could think about related content, that tie back into the relationships that exist between the content. I'm not sponsored by Screaming Frog, but a big shout out to the team over there as they've integrated all the things in from the AI crawler perspective. And I see a lot of the other ones doing that too. I've seen Botify do some cool stuff there. But yeah, just thinking about how we can be more efficient with it. And then when we think about AI search, I think, at least at the time of recording this, we're about to do a webinar that talks about a lot of the different metrics that go into AI search. But we've tried to actually break down code and scripts that allow us to measure the things that actually have an impact on AI search. So we've kind of narrowed in from a scientific perspective to what factors make the most sense. And we can use that to effectively build a strategy for our clients, but also measure it in a way that we can show improvement from it.
And what are maybe some of the factors? Give us a sneak a sneak peek. Maybe you'll share 5 factors. Now you can share 2.
Yeah. Let me go ahead and even just pull this up a little bit. There's definitely a couple different things to think about when we're looking at the scoring of pages and the metrics that we want to look at. Like there is at a high level, and this one's kind of been talked about, so this isn't breaking news, but like a content keyword cosine similarity score. And that kind of goes back to what I was talking about with the relevant scoring piece, right? That is a factor. If we need to look at it, the studies that we've run show the impact around making sure that your content is aligned with the focal keyword from a cosine similarity perspective. But there's also even factors around comprehensive coveraging of content and how you look at the word usage that factors into it. So are you using semantic triples? Are you very clear about the data and the facts that you're talking about? Are you avoiding ambiguity? Are you effectively conveying in a digestible format the content that you're looking for? Because when the crawlers are coming in and they're trying to break apart a large piece of content, you can't guarantee the chunk that you want that gets pulled from an AI crawler is the chunk that you've given. So if you're optimizing for that, then there's a lot of value in looking at the chunkability of pieces of content. But there's also ways of measuring that. So like we've created what's called an optimal chunkability score. And that way we can effectively look at the content of the page and say, all right, well, based on the content we have and based on how we're trying to optimize towards this keyword, here's how we would navigate back mathematically, scientifically to say, here's how we should chunk up that content to be more digestible for crawlers, but also for users too. I think there has been a whole debate on chunkability. That could be an entire conversation point, but we have been looking at measuring how effectively we should be organizing a piece of content.
How do you how is the measurement? What are the metrics put in place to sort of how is this calculated? If you could share what's going on underneath. I know that you guys have spoken a lot about relevance engineering,
Yes.
right? And this is something I would love for you to define as well. It's how you're moving from a framework beyond just indexing towards being understood. If you're trying to pitch this concept to a CMO, investing in these new metrics or how, you need to structure your content and this course would make sense, what is maybe the simplest way to explain relevance engineering and how these sort of math are the ones that you guys are developing and how they're measured, how they're built?
Yeah. So I know Mike talked about relevance engineering a lot last year. and it's kind of defined how we operate. Essentially, for lack of better words, it's what we've chosen to call the new age of optimizing for everything. So relevance engineering for us is a proprietary framework that we've kind of designed and that we offer, but it's the way that the art and the science of improving the visibility for any search surface comes into play. So it's kind of the information and intersection around information retrieval, user experience, artificial intelligence, content strategy, and digital PR. So all of these things that we're talking about stem from how they worked in a classic search perspective, but kind of evolve in a slightly different way. So like content strategy, for example, if we think about content strategy in the modern world and what needs to be done, it needs to operate more on a omnimedia, multimodal based content structure. It doesn't operate purely on just text content anymore. Not to say that that's not important, it still is. But you need to meet your users where they are from a user experience standpoint and provide the type of content that they're expecting to see. So, for example, if I'm talking about an API, then yeah, I maybe would expect some textual documentation, but I also might expect a video, potentially like how I integrate this API, how I use it. I might expect some how-to documentation that goes along with it, and some structured data that could support that. If I'm thinking about different ways of targeting an audience from like a finance perspective. So, for example, I'm actually doing a webinar tomorrow, at least as the time of recording this, and one of the ones I'm talking about is if we think about the idea of, hey, we want to go after best high yield savings account for 2026. In some cases, you might have content that goes after the financial data APIs. You might need textual content that talks about, let's say, the minimum deposit required for the banking on a product page. You might need insurance explanations for the government or educational sources. You might need a comparison based content piece that talks about how you compare to other product offerings down the line. But essentially, every different type of content that we're talking about there may necessitate a different type of content supporting it in terms of whether it's video, textual, infographic, imagery, data tables, things like that. So we need to think about it from a wider array lens than what we have historically and tying back into that experience. So it's kind of an offshoot of how we've thought about content strategy before, but there's just some differences and nuances around how we think about things that impact the AI search component. So SEO is very vague, for example, in terms of a lot of different ways that you might look at optimizing for SEO, and we don't really have clear-cut information around how some things work. But kind of going back to the AI search component, we've been able to dig into some of the metrics that actually do work, and we're able to take a little bit more of a scientific, data-driven approach to how we think about optimizing for that, and then how that ties back to optimizing for classic search too.
And how do you send up some of these experiments? Because you say that it's scientifically backed. And so maybe you could share, this can be related to the chunking tool that you have. How did that idea come about? How was it tested? And how was it statistically sound to be able to be like, hey, this is, a relevant way in which you can tell that your content is being digested by an LLM?
Yeah, 100%. So we have a balance of access between partners that we've worked with that have given us access to data, and then partners we work with from a tooling perspective that given us access to their data too. So we can see visibility components, data components around this, and we can run high-level data analysis that digs down into some of the deep aspects here and essentially look at, for example, talk about the chunkability score piece. Like I can back into the different elements that factor into chunkability score. So essentially, we're taking things like the existing structure of the page, the paragraphs of content that exist, the headings, how does it align with the overall underlying semantic structure of the page? And then we can optimize and look at those heading structures. We can measure the section length distribution. We can look at how we calculate the paragraph length. We can look at the quantification list versus a prose ratio. And then we can look at how we detect the semantic boundaries of the content and build a composite score around it. So then we can back into essentially creating our own metric that allows us to determine how chunkable a page is, but also be able to look at a correlation coefficient and say, all right, this actually does make a difference or not in what we see. It comes down to basic statistics at the end of the day, but it allows us to at least be able to say, all right, we think this might be a factor. Let's take the data we have and back into, all right, let's actually structure a test around this. We have enough data coming in from a wide variety of different sites. We have enough industry data coming in. Let's build that experiment back into the statistical analysis we want to do and go from there.
Nice. I appreciate your openness in sharing this, because I feel like a lot of claims, especially on LinkedIn, are being made on, hey, we have this
Trust me,
metric,
bro.
new metric, and no one really, besides maybe sharing one screenshot of like, showing that this is a study, no one really goes into detail on what factors are they putting, this is involved, how are things being weighted, like, what statistical evidence is there, like how statistically sound is this? So it's very important, I feel like, to list down what factors you take into consideration when building these new metrics, essentially, or these new trackers, etc. So that's why I wanted to know, and thanks for sharing.
Yeah,
I wanted to
I will say it's a good question. I mean, that's the thing too, is like, yeah, I can only go so deep into some of these metrics that we're talking about. So there's some vagueness in what I'm putting out there. But like,
Mhm.
I think that's what I love about being back at iPullRank, because my team is not only, I operate as the senior director of SEO and data analytics here at iPullRank. So what that means is I get to work with the folks and partner with the folks that do this data analysis. And a lot of our data analysts also have an SEO background. So we're able to kind of take that experience and use it to say, okay, we think this is a thing. Now let's actually go figure out if it is a thing or not. Because I also have a little bit of a background in statistics myself, and then from the engineering perspective. So it's been fun to be able to look into these types of things. And not to say you can't do this in-house, but I feel like you're a lot more limited in how you can look at it, because you're isolated to a limited set of data or a limited circumstance, for example.
So you can't generalize a lot of your findings. They're more anecdotal if you're in-house, I guess. So
Yeah.
exciting place for you to be at. I wanted to move into our AI hot takes / rapid fire round.
Okay.
So a bunch of questions around the world of AI and SEO. It does not necessarily mean you need to give me one word answers, but yeah, it should be something that immediately pop, like, your first impression, or your first thought. So you don't have to take too much time. There's no judgment on your hot takes,
All right.
basically. Nice. So the first question is, what is the most useful AI workflow you have built in the last 6 months?
Well, I think it ties back to some of the stuff that we were talking about before, because we've built out AI workflows that help us automate things like being able to vectorize the content and being able to analyze the content, use that to help guide some of the implementation aspects and strategies forward. We've been able to use it to evaluate and take down and scrape content. We've been able to use it to look at uh, how internal linking strategies should work. So I would say like the workflow is multifaceted, but it's kind of taking a look at, okay, now that we know that there's an issue or an opportunity with a partner that we're working with in this place, let's build out the code, or basically use the code that we have to then define how we build the recommendation for them around like, hey, your internal linking flow is not working enough. Here's how you should do it correctly based on the scoring that we see.
Nice. And which metric do you think most teams track that has almost become meaningless?
Oof. I have seen a lot of companies tracking traffic as their main metric. And I'm not going to say that's wrong, but I'm going to say in an age where traffic is becoming less and less because folks are getting their immediate answers and zero clicking, that shouldn't be your core KPI.
Now I kind of want to jump into what's been recently going on in the space of AI with the launch from Anthropic and also OpenAI. We have Codex from OpenAI, and then Anthropic has Codework with amazing capabilities, right? But then it brings out conversations around the future of AI agents. It's becoming more of a reality, because I feel like in the beginning of last year, it was very much a hot topic, but then there weren't many capabilities to sort of like implement it.
Right.
So conversations like died down a bit. But recently, in the last 2 weeks at least, things have sort of spring back up. So my question is, where do you draw the line between assistant and autonomous agent? And what's the first task you would never delegate?
This is probably going to be a personal preference thing, but for me, it becomes when we start getting into anything heavily personal. And what I mean by that, for example, is, yeah, I might ask an agent to build a stock portfolio for me, but I'm not going to just have it go implement it and risk my money at the hands of an AI agent, let alone giving it access to all my bank accounts and things like that. That's maybe just like an example of kind of where I would draw the line for me, is like I might use it for some component of research or some component of organization, but I hesitate having the agentic piece go there. Like when I was in the real estate space, there was a big conversation about, yeah, agentic's very valuable if, let's say, you want to have it find the right place for you in a certain area based on certain criteria, maybe even book a tour for you. But then as you get deeper down into the actual, I want to buy this place, I want to rent this place type of thing, I think there comes a point where the agentic aspect either becomes less trustworthy or questionable.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So you're not trusting everything just yet. Have you been playing around with any of these tools actually, like with Claude's Cowork specifically? Or since you have more of a technical background, have you just been working more with Claude Code? Maybe you can walk us through. This is me stepping out of the rapid fire
Sure.
round a bit because I think it's something interesting to dive deeper in. But maybe you could share your experience so far.
Yeah, I've been working a little bit more with Claude Code, and then a little bit with playing with Gemini too, and OpenAI from that perspective. But really, what I'm looking for is trying to build some of the tools and the workflows that I'm trying to use to make my life easier, if that makes sense. So if I'm auditing a website for SEO purposes, for example, I can kind of build that workflow and have it do a lot of the automation for me to a point. I can have it get me to the point where I can do the analysis and dig into it a little bit more effectively than what I have been able to do historically speaking. That's kind of where I've been having a lot more fun lately from more of, I'm going to call it the vibe coding perspective, but kind of thinking about like, oh, I wish I had something that did this. Oh, wait, I can make it. And, start thinking about the tools that I might want to have in place there, or taking a tool that maybe we already have and expanding on, we have something that does X, but I wish it did X plus Y. Okay, cool. Well, now I can look at how I would do that instead too and be a lot more efficient. The way I like to look at it is I have a development background. I can look at code. I can tell you what's wrong with it. I can write code to a point, but I'm not a full stack developer. So I can use this to enable me to create some of the products, tools, features that maybe I could only imagine in my wildest dreams before. And I would need to hire some developer at, X dollars an hour to be able to do for me. But now I feel like I can do a fair good bit of that myself. Now, with that said, there's a fair amount of inefficiencies in the code that it outputs that needs to be cleaned up. So sometimes it helps to have some of the development skills or more of a full stack developer available to improve efficiencies around the code, but you can at least get there and then have a good baseline to work with.
Okay, so don't get rid of the developers just yet.
I'm a big
They're
believer in
not
never
all.
get rid of the developers, period. But you can use things to maybe help make your workflows easier and leave the complicated stuff to them.
And do you think this would empower more SEOs? Because when it comes to collaborating with other teams, right, to get technical assistance, for SEOs, sometimes they can just, some requests can just be another ticket in a developer's list, and trying to fight for priority can be tough.
Yep.
So do you think these capabilities would actually empower more SEOs to sort of implement things on their own? And then just have the main engineers do some QA for sure. How do you see this helping them from empowering them with their technical tasks?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be transparent and say I've even seen developers using AI to try and get some stuff implemented quicker, or like, I actually saw an example the other day. I was trying to add a form of structured data to a schema markup that already existed on a page, but I wasn't quite sure how to do it in this plugin's instance. And they used AI to basically say, hey, I want to do this. How can I do it? Code worked. Doesn't always work. I think it helps a lot of SEOs to be able to have more of the conversations with development on conveying a possible solution. Never tell a developer what to do, but a possible solution on what's there, and just kind of saying, hey, I see this issue. This is maybe a way that we can solve it based on my familiarity with the code base, my familiarity with the CMS system, especially if you're using an off-the-shelf system, like it's a lot easier to kind of figure out a solution for some of those things. But you're able to have maybe some deeper conversations there. Or if you are truly staffed for engineering product resources, maybe it does allow you to go and implement and build things yourself. Sometimes even when I was in an in-house role, sometimes you just need to build things yourself in order for it to get done because you don't have the resources to do it. For example, like I'm a big believer in Index Now that Bing and multiple other folks have put out there. I think eventually maybe Google gets on board with that too, maybe depending on the outcome of the monopoly case and what goes on there. But I had to build a tool that could do the Index Now submissions for me in some of the places I've worked because I couldn't get the allocation of sprint points to get it built as a tool internally. Like, all right, cool. It's not that hard to build. I can have a tool as simple as dropping in a CSV list and uploading it, or I can build something dynamically. But the long run should be building out like a proof case or a fundamental proof case around, all right, here's how I did it. Here's what works. Can we turn this into a full-fledged product? And I say product as in like an internal product or, something that does help improve efficiency.
But it helps you create like an ugly MVP to at least
Exactly.
get the cosign of like, of other people that can help you then execute, which is more empowering, I suppose.
When it
And
finally did come time to build that tool internally, by the way, it ended up taking like 2.5 months worth of sprints in order to do because of the nuances with the CMS, and there was a homegrown CMS system, so there were a lot of complexities around it and doing it right, but also a shortage of sprint points available. So yeah, I was able to do like a trial run and show, hey, this mattered. But then when I tried to implement it for real, then you run into the real restrictions of it. But at least now I could prove,
Mhm.
hey, this is actually worth doing.
Yeah, and that's important in itself.
Right.
And I actually, jumping back into the rapid fire round, because I think this is quite a relevant question. What SEO task should be automated by default?
Ooh, how much time do you have? I think there's a lot of
The first thing
elements.
on top of your mind.
I think there's a lot of data that can be automated. So if I'm thinking about, for example, here at iPullRank, we would do, if we're kicking off an engagement, let's say, we would do a keyword portfolio, we would do a technical audit, we would do a content audit, we would build a content plan. And then there's a lot of things that stem off of that around how we then build the strategy out around that. There are a lot of elements that we can automate in terms of the crawling, the data pulling, some of the analysis that we need to do in order to spend more time focusing on building the strategy and building what matters. So to me, if you're still doing a lot of the hand analysis of, taking all of your keywords and bucketing them and looking at the search volume analysis and then building out your keyword groups and all that stuff, yeah, there's still some value in doing that. But you can let an AI process handle a good chunk of that for you. And then you come in, you validate it, you solidify it, you make sure you're focused in the right spot. I've seen people hand build a keyword portfolio, and it contains stuff that has nothing to do with, and I'm not talking about here, I'm talking about in prior life, that have nothing to do with the business that you're doing. So if you can automate some aspects of that, so basically, all right, cool, I wanted to go pull this data from here. I want to organize these keywords in this way. I want to run this script that looks at the similarity of the keyword to the focal point of what we're actually trying to do as an organization. Does this keyword make sense to include in it or not? What persona might be tied to it? What piece of content ties to it? Some of the tools that we built at IPR, like Qforia, looks at like the fan out queries, but we also define, hey, based on what shows up in this fan out query or what shows up in the traditional results here, you want to have this type of content piece, maybe a video, for example. So now you can kind of automate that a little bit to guide your process. And then again, spend more time thinking about how you actually get it implemented and build on that strategy.
Next question, which is also related. What is your then favorite boring tactic that still wins in SEO? Since you've automated that bit, what's maybe a tactic that you would use to implement that people might think it's boring or um, it's old school SEO that you still think it's relevant today?
So I frame it as again, I'm a structured data nerd, and that is probably my second favorite topic in SEO after doing like replatformings and migrations and things like that. I am a little bit of a masochist.
We need to have a whole separate episode on migrations, by the way. I had
would
some
love
migration questions, but we had so much ground to cover because your experience lies everywhere.
Yeah,
I hope I can get you to
I've done over
to hop on
100
another
migrations, replatformings, whatnot. That's definitely my bread and butter, and I love doing that. But when I look at structured data, to answer your question, yes, you can basically go to a ChatGPT, a Claude, a Gemini, and say, hey, I'm trying to build a structured data script for this page. Go write it for me. I still enjoy writing some of that stuff by hand, and I still enjoy the analysis of going, all right, here's all the vocabulary I want and I can include in here. And sometimes the output I get from AI is great and solid and it could work, but sometimes it misses some pieces I want or some nuances that I'm interested in including in there. And so, yeah, maybe there's some components that get automated via AI, but I do prefer doing that by hand for the most part and at least overseeing it.
Fair. And next question, what is the worst AI SEO advice you keep seeing repeatedly?
Asking the AI why you don't rank an AI.
Are people really still doing that?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
I
Okay.
actually even got an email last week from someone just kind of going like, yeah, I asked ChatGPT why we weren't ranking for this keyword and they gave me this advice. I'm like, yeah, about that. So yes, I do still see that, unfortunately. And look, I don't blame you for trying. Maybe you think there's some hidden secret there, but let's be honest. If that worked, we'd all be doing it right now.
You'll all be out of a
And
job.
we'd all be out of a job. But it doesn't work. And that's the thing, because I mean, a lot of it's so based on either it's pulling from the learning models, which are go ask ChatGPT, Perplexity, whatever, when's your learning data up to date to? And usually it's a year behind. And then you're relying on the RAG model for anything that's more current than that. You're not getting the real answer. Now, you could use it to organize and think about strategy, but you need to give it more than and you need to give it data points. You need to give it something to analyze. Don't just ask it, hey, why is site X outranking me here?
And I think this is a very important conversation, right? This is the awareness that people that maybe don't work in this field or need more exposure and understanding about with regards to these LLMs. They're only good in prediction
Some
and
generation.
analysis.
Yeah.
Depending on the data that you feed it, not just what's existing in their system.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's a wider educational.
I get that question more
You
from
know.
folks that are not directly SEOs. I mean, don't get me wrong. If I have it from an
Yeah.
SEO, I'm going to have a little bit more of a question mark look on my face.
Yes.
But I get it from like occasionally like a C-level executive kind of going like, hey man, I don't see us ranking here. And I asked ChatGPT why. Like, I get why you might think
Yeah.
that works. Maybe this isn't your forte, but let me maybe talk you through the education component around why that doesn't work.
And what kind of resources do you recommend SEOs use to have these conversations with the rest of their team so that they can understand? Because now the spotlight's on them, right? Like in their team, but they still have to educate other stakeholders within the company and also C-suite who, you know, have a totally completely different understanding of the reality of how these LLMs work, how it works in relation to SEOs. So what kind of resources, if you have any suggestions that can help empower SEOs to have these conversations, or instead of save their time from explaining it and just sort of point them in the direction of like these sources?
Yeah. Resources in itself are a little awkward. I do like pulling in some of the data studies that are out there, and there's constantly ones coming out from SparkToro, Datos, SEMrush has done a couple, Profound has put out a fair number of them. So I do like using the data studies to help articulate some of the conversations. And I may be privileged because I had a lot of these conversations in-house when I was at apartments. I had a lot of these conversations here at iPullRank when I'm talking to client teams that are in-house. And, you know, there's a lot of it where sometimes the in-house team can explain it right all day long, but sometimes it takes a third party to validate what they're hearing. And you know, sometimes that's where like we as iPullRank can come in and kind of go, hey, let's have an education session. Like we're on the forefront of what's going on in AI optimization today. Let's talk about what's going on here and what we're actually seeing. Your team is not doing it wrong. This is just how X works. And we need to lean into doing this in order to go after this. So I think part of it is looking at some of the data studies and seeing how things evolve. And because there's constant data studies that are coming out, staying on top of that, staying on top of news, staying on top of changes that are coming to the AI platforms and landscape and tooling. Like, I mean, you've kind of talked about a couple of them. We've talked about them on this conversation. Even if I think back to going into around Black Friday in the States sale time and going into the holiday season, you started seeing all these things come out about like e-commerce tie-ins to ChatGPT and how you can leverage these connectors and build all that out there. It's constantly changing and evolving. You need to stay on top of these new features that are coming out if that's directly impacting your business. But a lot of it's just staying up with industry news and what's going on within the space and frankly, following the right people. The big one I'm also a big fan of, and this is actually like it was a contributor to me coming back and seeing how well this was done and how much further along iPullRank was than some other folks, is we have the AI search manual that we launched in, I want to say it was September of last year, maybe August. And that explains everything you need to know about how the AI engines work, function, pull content, how you should optimize for it and against it. And it's actually something we're in the midst of adding some more chapters to because things have evolved and changed. So sometimes I like to point a lot of folks to the AI search manual and certain aspects of that to help them understand or talk about what's going on there. And we also have like a TLDR version too for folks that don't have the time to read the depth of it. So I'm a big believer in using that as an information guidance.
Great. 3 more questions set for the round until we're done with the round. One tool you did not expect to love.
I'm going to classify as really any tool that tracks AI visibility.
But you were skeptic at first.
I was skeptical at first. And not to say I'm the firmest believer now, but I do appreciate more of the data and insights that come out of it now to help guide a strategy. So for example, thinking about like sentiment scoring, for example, is something that these tools have gotten a lot better at putting out there. If I have a very negative sentiment in something that's being included in an AI answer, that's impeding my ability to have folks click through to me if they want to continue down deeper into the conversion funnel, for example. So then I have a better idea around how I can guide fixing that. But that's just
aren't they essentially AI visibility tools then sort of like brand monitoring tools with a wrapper on it? Because if you're mentioning sentiment,
to a
they're
point.
exciting because of their sentiment analysis aspect. Like,
Yeah,
How
to
do
a
you feel
point,
about
I
that?
think because there's still a lot of ambiguity around the prompts that folks are using and how we basically, it comes down to garbage in, garbage out. If we can identify the right prompts to look at it to, then I think it goes a little bit beyond the brand wrapper component. But if you're putting in, so like I've come on board with some partners over the last year or two, and I've gotten insight into their Profound or their Peak or whatever license, and their prompts don't make any sense, and you can tell no one's searching for something like this. Then yeah, the tool's kind of a waste. It's only as good as what you're putting into it and what you're using. But some of these tools have gotten better at identifying some of the prompt research data and what goes into it, the usage of it, how you should think about optimizing for some of these things. So it's gotten better. Again, I'm like, I still want, I'm not a big fan in like, trust me, bro type of thing with any type of tooling, but they've started to continue to prove things to me that make me more trustworthy of some of the data that I'm seeing. And even just kind of in seeing like, the Profound folks speaking at a conference and showing some of the data that's coming out of their system, it instills more confidence than I had maybe 2 years ago, where I'm kind of going, well, how are you doing this? There's a probability component where every time I search the query, I'm getting something different. And, there were
Mhm.
not great answers. And now I feel like the answers are getting better and able to more effectively guide towards a
Okay.
solution there.
Fair. In 6 months from now, what capability, search or AI, will force teams to change their SEO operating model the fastest?
I'm going to look at this maybe from a slightly different angle, but I suspect AI mode is eventually going to become the default for Google, depending on how well
They're
it performs.
forcing it down us.
Basically, I mean, even over the weekend now, I'm starting to get like, I performed a search in Chrome on my phone and it took me straight into AI mode, even though I didn't want it to. So I think they're going to start forcing it to a point, but they need to figure out how to make ads work in it. And if ads don't work in it, they're going to keep experimenting until it does. And the second I think that they find a way of not impacting their bottom line revenue, then I don't see a reason why AI mode doesn't become more prevalent or the default, because then it just keeps people in the Google ecosystem more. So I think that's something that's going to continue to evolve over time. I think agentic is going to continue to become a bigger thing too. I think folks are going to start using it more, seeing the benefit of it, but I think they're going to be a little weary about how to use it. I've even had like folks kind of go, "Oh, this is only a matter of time until it becomes Terminator." Like, okay, easy there. But I get why there's skepticism. Take it slow.
I wanted to end it with, if you have one word to describe the future of SEO, what would that word be?
Data. I think a lot of folks are still operating SEO on look and feel, if that makes sense, which is not a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. Like if I'm auditing a site, I do spend time looking around the site and seeing what sticks out to me as something wrong with it. But I don't think enough folks are using data to guide their conversations, either internally with their stakeholders or externally with partners that they work with. I'm seeing a lot more requests around, for example, providing ROI on anything that comes forward. So you can't just provide a recommendation based on, oh, this is best practice, why are you not doing it? No, you need to basically be able to explain why it matters, what the benefit is of doing it, and actually being able to put a dollar number to it, or you're just a snake oil salesman at that point. You need to be able to convey the value that you're providing and then report on the value that it actually drove.
So your proprietary data and third-party data to kind of build up a case to support whatever SEO plans you have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Sound advice?
it's not just like, I'm a car guy too. It's not just like being a mechanic in the days where like, oh, I can just look at the engine and I can tell you that this ignition coil looks bad. No, now I need to actually go into the computer, see the data, see what's wrong with it, and diagnose a little bit more deeply. And it's kind of the same way we need to look at it from an SEO perspective. I see plenty of people using data, but I still see a fair number that don't or don't use it effectively.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach.
Yeah.
I'll end it at that. Please let the people know how they can reach out to you, how they can keep in touch with
Yeah.
You mentioned that you'll be hosting a webinar. Like how do the people stay informed on
Yeah.
learning from you and what's going on with you?
Best one would be following me on LinkedIn. So feel free to add me. It's under Zachary Chahalis / Zachary Chahalis on I still call it Twitter. On X or Blue Sky, I'm at Zach Chahalis, so feel free to add me there. I also have multiple opportunities throughout the year where I'll be speaking at some conferences and events. So we have SEO Week coming up at the end of April, hosted by iPullRank in New York City. I'll be speaking there and going into some of these deeper topics around some of the relevance engineering metrics that we started to talk about here. And then I'll be speaking at some other events too, like Digital Summit and a couple more this year. So come find me, check me out, or hopefully see you in person at some of these conferences.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Zach. This is